When I was a teenager, a friend and I hired a tandem. Neither of us, we hired it for the day, and neither of us had ever ridden a tandem before. And the bike was built for men. So even with the saddles as low as they could possibly go, we still couldn't reach the ground because we were both short. So we had to agree when we were stopping that we'd lean to the left at the same time so that we could hit the curb or fall off at the same time. No problem. So we start off, and with my friend on the front and me on the back. Have you ever ridden on the back of a tandem? You got no control. You have to trust the person in front. You have to trust them to steer and to know where they're going. Well, it wasn't long before we came to a roundabout, and my friend was aiming for the wrong exit. So from the back, I tried to steer with the handlebars that don't move. So I'm trying to go like this, and I'm leaning this way, and she's trying to go that way. So we ended up in a side alley in a heap. Fortunately, we both saw the funny side of it. When life feels chaotic and overwhelming, we can frantically look for things that we can control. However, it doesn't take long before we find ourselves exhausted or discouraged or in a heap down an alley. We can never truly be in control of our circumstances. But thankfully, we serve a God who always is. But that doesn't stop us from wanting to be in control. Probably all of us have a fear of losing control in some way or another, whether it's over circumstances, health, relationships, or the future. And it could show itself as anxiety, perfectionism, micromanaging, paralysis in decision-making, or spiritual legalism. Or maybe fear of losing control is that we're afraid of literally losing it. We're afraid to say what we really feel in case we can't stop and the tears will be never-ending. Or perhaps we have to bite our tongue all the time because we're not sure that we're going to be able to control our physical reactions. Or, this was me, we keep on working when everything's falling apart and don't admit that we're falling apart. Because that sounds like a failure. Fear of losing control causes sleeplessness, it could cause compulsive planning, anger when plans fail, distrust of others, avoidance of risk. Sorry, this sounds a bit like a talk on mental health, doesn't it? But I am really aware that there is a danger that fear like this becomes deep and really damaging to your health. Please, if you do feel like this, please speak to someone that you trust. Please talk to a friend. Get professional help if you need it. But please don't suffer alone. It is important to get it sorted. But fear of control has many faces. The disciples faced the fear in a literal storm. And their reaction reveals how we often respond when life feels out of control. This passage shows us what happens when fear takes control and how faith in Jesus reclaims our peace. Jesus has just said to the disciples, let's go over to the other side of the lake. So they obey him. They get into the boat and they set off. Now, many of them are experienced fishermen. They know what the Sea of Galilee is like. A fierce squall can come up at any time without warning. The lake is known for developing squalls out of nowhere. Look at this. This is the lake, the Sea of Galilee. It did have some words with it, but never mind. It doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter. It's nearly finished. That's what we imagine the Sea of Galilee to look like, isn't it? That's what it looked like when we went. That storm you just saw was the last really big one, which was in 1992, I think. A storm like that can easily flip a boat the size of the one that the disciples would have been in. Years ago, I went whitewater rafting down the Zambezi. Only the driver had oars. So he had 2 oars, and he was sitting on a sort of box thing on this rubber raft. And it's one of the most difficult whitewater tracks in the world. And we had to lean over the boat on top of each other every time we went into a wave. So as we came into the rapids, we'd all lean over the front and all on top of each other like a rugby scum. And we had to do it as we went into it. So we were absolutely swamped with water. It's probably the most dangerous thing I've ever done in my life, but it was also the most exhilarating. And my Swatch waterproof watch is at the bottom of the Zambezi somewhere because in one of the scrums it came off. One of our boats in front of us flipped in front of us, and the boat was snatched out of my friend's hand, and she was dragged under the water. The force of the water ripped off her shorts. Fortunately, she was wearing a swimming costume, but that is the power of water. No wonder the disciples were afraid. We have to remember that these are seasoned fishermen. They know what to do when a storm hits, but they're terrified. But they were following Jesus. Shouldn't they have been protected from the storm? That's a belief that many Christians have, but I'm afraid it's not true. The promise is that Jesus will always be with us in the storms of life, not that we will be protected from them. Following Jesus doesn't exempt us from trouble. The passage tells us that the disciples took Jesus with them just as he was. Now, I wonder, how often do we try to change Jesus into what we want? We want him on our terms and not on his. Jesus doesn't promise comfort. He promises his presence. And Jesus was with them in the boat. He told them they were going to the other side. They should have trusted that. They were going to the other side because Jesus has told them that they're going to the other side. Sometimes we assume that control means safety, but faith means trusting the one who's in the boat with us, not the condition of the sea. The disciples felt powerless, and their fear rose up with the height of the waves. Even the skills of the seasoned fishermen could not handle this storm. Their expertise had failed, and so they were afraid. In their fear, they look to Jesus, which is the best place to look when you're afraid. And they see him sleeping peacefully in the midst of all the chaos. And that bugs them. They mistake his calmness for indifference. "Don't you care if we drown?" they shout. A couple of weeks ago in Lectio 365, they quoted Dallas Willard's one-word description of Jesus. He described Jesus as being relaxed. And when you think about all the incidents involving Jesus, he is always relaxed. Now I can hear somebody saying, "Oh, not when he turned the tables in the temple." But actually, even then, he stopped first and made a whip. So he calmly made a whip and then turned the tables. He was never in a rush. And he is now resting in the back of the boat which is being tossed about like a toy, because he knows that they will get to the other side. He is confident of God's presence and power. Sometimes we think that God isn't there because we can't hear his voice. Just because he's silent doesn't mean that he's not there. Like the disciples, our fear can grow because we look at the waves instead of looking at what Jesus has promised us. Jesus is there with them, and he is relaxed. But they woke him up anyway. So Jesus got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Jesus has the authority to command the waves and the winds to be still. In fact, he has the authority to command whatever terrifies us. Jesus went to the cross to deal with the storms in our lives. In the stillness of the tomb, when everybody thought that everything was lost, all things were being made new. God was still at work. And when Jesus rose from the grave, he conquered the power of death and sin once for all. He has the authority to overcome all our trials. We just have to have the faith. No condition needs to be permanent. All things are being made new. In Jesus, we have overcome not just some things, but all things. In Mark's gospel alone, we see Jesus having power over demonic powers, terminal diseases, permanent injuries, and nature. He also has power over the source of all the world's problems, sin. We're only 4 chapters into the Gospel of Mark, and Jesus has already cast out an evil spirit, healed Peter's mother-in-law, healed a man with leprosy who had faith to believe. He healed a paralytic who was lowered down on a mat through the ceiling, and he also forgave his sin. He healed many, many other sick people. And the evil spirits that he encountered had cried out to him in fear, "You are the Son of God," because they knew his power and authority. Yet the disciples who had been with him all through this time still don't seem to have the same faith. If he could do all these things, surely he could sort out a storm. I wonder if the quiet, be still, is for the disciples as well. It certainly gets them thinking. After Jesus has rebuked the wind and the waves, he turns back on the disciples and says, "Where is your faith?" Their fear said, "We're going under." But faith says, he's still in charge. We might be in the middle of a storm in our lives. And we might feel angry and afraid because it feels like we have no control. The fact is that some things are out of our control, believe it or not, but they're not out of his. True peace doesn't come from calmer circumstances, but from a clearer view of Christ's control. In the midst of the storm, could Jesus be asking you, where is your faith? Who do you believe that I am? Do you believe that I can get you through this? He also asks us, what are you learning from this? As the storm stills, the fear of the disciples shifts to fear of Jesus. "Who is this?" they say. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." That is the right kind of fear. Holy awe, reverent fear, not human anxiety. It takes the storm for the disciples to recognize that Jesus is Lord. When life feels out of control, the storm may be the stage where Jesus reveals his power to you. Nothing that happens in this life is ever wasted. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Every experience that we experience is a learning platform. It's an opportunity to sit at the feet of Jesus and ask, what are you showing me, Lord? What can I learn from this? How can I grow closer to you? Often we try to control the outcomes because we want to avoid the fear of loss or rejection or uncertainty. We can see it in controlling parents who schedule every hour of a child's life so that they avoid the bad outcomes. That child is never going to be able to cope if anything goes wrong. Clinging to control costs our freedom and our relationships. Managers who micromanage their staff lose the team's creativity and trust. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take." And that path may take us through a storm, but we are asked to lean on his understanding and not ours. He knows what he's doing, and he can see the bigger picture and the way out of the storm. Faith is about surrendering and trusting, and a belief that God is working even through loss. I remember being given the helm of the tall ship Morning Star. We were tacking down the Swale in Kent. I don't know whether you know, but it's very narrow, and it's a big boat. It was terrifying, and I was so glad to be able to hand the wheel back to someone who knew what they were doing. Surrendering control to competent hands. And that's what we do when we hand things back to God. And the relief is even greater when we don't have to be in control. The fear of losing control exposes our deepest need, not for the mastery of life, but to trust in the master of life. You may not be able to calm the storm, but you can rest in the one who can and trust that he will get you through it. And the great thing about being on the back of a tandem is that you can put your feet up and be chauffeured if you want to be, but you need to learn to trust, to have faith in the driver. Faith begins where our control ends. Let go, not into chaos, but into the capable hands of Jesus. Amen. Let's pray. If you'd like to stand, I'm going to ask the band to come. The band are already up. We're going to sing a song together as a response, but I wanted to pray first. As we stand before God, you might like to open your hands before God. Is control